Martha, for joining me. I'm so interested about what you're going to share with us today. And we met through the Women in Business Network Ireland, right?
You did indeed, yeah.
We ended up sitting next to each other at the awards ceremony last month. So that was really nice to get to know you. And why don't you share where you're based and a little bit about yourself? And we're talking about astrology today, so feel free to also share how you got interested in that topic.
Okay, well, thank you, first of all, for having me on your show. I'm very flattered to be asked. So I have always been interested in astrology. I became interested like when I was 12. There just always seemed to be a lot of Geminis in my life. I started having my own astrology chart read during the middle of my divorce. It was the only thing that made sense of my life and of the challenges that I was going through. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely seen and heard for who I really, really was, not for who society expected me to be or not for who my family expected me to be. So I'm currently living in Cork, McSherry in West Cork. I moved back here last year. And I continued building my practice during COVID and during all the lockdowns, like many people did. I'm very fortunate to still have been able to keep my business running. I'm very grateful for that. And why I'm so passionate about family astrology is because it helped me understand members of my own family, literally, as soon as we started studying astrology. I moved to Italy in 2014 to develop my photography business. And I really thought I was going to land in Milan or Venice or somewhere and make it really big as a photographer. And that didn't happen. I was once again a low-paid nanny, except this time I was in Italy.
Okay.
But I had started studying astrology with my teacher at the time. He had started teaching again after a gap of several years. And I remember at the time thinking, well, actually, I'm living my dream life in Italy. I don't need astrology as well because I followed my astrology path. And then I just found myself studying and loving it and learning it at the speed of light. And from the very beginning, family astrology as well as locational astrology were a big part of my readings. Because from the get-go, I was using what I knew of the charts of the children I was minding to help understand them more, you know, because I know that's what we really connected with when we met. I mean, I think I may have said to you that day, I think if the world would be a very different place if by the age of 12, we all learned. Because, you know, Mercury in your chart is how you communicate. The moon is how you have your needs met. Saturn is how you structure and put routine and discipline around things. And, you know, we all know couples where the wife plans things on an Excel sheet a year in advance and the husband flies by the seat of his pants and somehow it works. And that's probably two different Saturns playing out. Could you imagine how boring it would be if like both parents had Excel spreadsheets up a year in advance? It'd probably be like more arguments. Like when I was married with two kids at home and two kids away, that's what we did. We had the flip chart up and that's their school holidays. That's when their midterms are. That's when they're off school. That's when we might go away. That's when one set has their exams. That's when the other set has their exams. And then you add in swimming classes and gym classes and hockey tournaments and, you know, your mind boggles. So I was, you know, I would have been the parent who had the whole flip chart up a year in advance, married to somebody who flew by the seat of his pants.
Absolutely. And that's how we kind of learn from each other.
Yeah.
And, you know, you got a little bit cut off when you started saying that you believe every child should have their chart read. You know, I'd love to go a little bit more into this because this is how I found astrology resonated with me myself, you know. So I grew up in a quite atheist place, you know, and I saw astrology my whole life as obviously the things that you read in the paper and it's somebody trying to make money, you know. And then I started some kind of awakening and remembering that there's a guidance out there for us. And I shared this with you, but I'd love to get this to guide ourselves into that with I read a little paragraph, not in a newspaper or anything, but it found me through the internet, you know, and it was about Gemini. And as you are Gemini and people close to you, you said it helped me so much as a parent, you know, to see why my Gemini child, you know, in one of these things we do as parents is we give a child a choice, you know, of two things. And this Gemini child of mine would always say, so if I would say, you can see me, right, Martha?
I can,
We're having technical difficulties. So if I would say to my young child, would you like green or pink? You know, this child would always say, I would like green. Oh no, I want pink. And until I knew that a Gemini kind of, and you can share more about this, needs to consult both, you know, I was driven demented thinking, why can my child not make decisions in life, you know? And so hearing that about my Gemini, and then I read about the other child who's a Taurus and is so determined and able to set boundaries and set boundaries with me this morning, you know. So I'd love to, if you could share a bit more how parents, how astrology, you know, dipping in or maybe even booking a session with you, how it would help them to really get to know their own child a bit better. You
Enormously, it would transform their relationships. I mean, my mother was 88 before I knew her moon in Aquarius needed to be listened to. The moon in Aquarius needs space to make its own decisions about how they feel about anything.
Okay.
And I used to bounce in as the dutiful daughter in her late 50s, wanting to like tidy the house and clean the house and cook, you know, 6 weeks worth of meals for my mother. My mother just wanted me to sit beside her and listen to her stories of her youth. That's all she wanted. So that transformed my relationship with my mother in the last 4 years in her life, because even though I was an adult, I was still her adult child. That's all she wanted, to be listened to. And the number of boyfriends she told me about, and she'd go, I told you about that person. I'd go, no, you didn't. But going back to like when we're parents with younger children, as I said, you know, popular astrology will have you think, you know, that couples, like it's all about Venus and Mars and love and seduction. But Mercury in families is how each person communicates. The moon is how they have their needs met. Saturn is how they put structure around things. So you might have your sun sign as Gemini and have 4 other planets in Taurus, or your sun sign in Leo and 5 planets in Virgo. Which would give your chart a much more Virgo feel than a Leo feel. But the planet that rules your chart is the planet that rules your rising sign. So you could be sun sign Leo and Taurus rising, which means Venus rules your chart. So you see everything through the lens of Venus. But coming back to Mercury, you know, if somebody has Mercury in a water sign, which would be like Pisces or Cancer or Scorpio, they'll tend to need an emotional connection in terms of how they communicate. If somebody has Mercury in an air sign, they will process things mentally. They'll want to be rational and sit down and discuss things. Whereas the Mercury in a water sign, that's the last thing they want. The Mercury in a water sign wants you like to hug them and like give them tissues and wipe away their tears. The Mercury in an air sign will go, here's the problem, how can we solve it? That's not what Mercury in a water sign wants or needs. And then Mercury in an earth sign will tend to be like, you know, solid and earthy and grounded and practical in terms of how they communicate. And then Mercury in a fire sign just wants to, as soon as they have the thought, they want to put it out there. But again, it depends on what fire sign. Mercury in Aries is real, shoot your mouth off as soon as you think it. Mercury in Leo is like, well, actually, I'll keep what I think to myself and I'll express it in my own time when I'm ready. Because Mercury can fall in any one of 12 signs. That's how Mercury talks to the other planets.
Yeah, and just for everyone who's maybe, sorry to interrupt you, Martha, but for everybody who's new to this, and I learned this, is that Gemini, like every star sign, right? Or I don't know what
every star sign is ruled by a certain planet.
And that's what also happened, because Mercury also is the kind of planet, I don't know.
Mercury rules Gemini. Mercury also rules Virgo, which most people forget.
Yes, and it stands for communication. They're good communicators generally.
Yeah, and again, we go back to, because all the planets are named after Greek or Roman gods. And that really helps us understand, you know, the planetary energy as well, a lot. You know, because Mercury was the only god who was able to transcend the spirit world, the earth world, and the underworld. Like Neptune was god of the sea, Pluto was god of the underworld. Mercury was one of a twin. When his twin died, he spent the rest of his life trying to communicate with his twin in the spirit world. And going back to the Greek and the Roman story of Persephone, whose daughter, who was Ceres' daughter, who was abducted by Pluto. When Ceres eventually was able to figure out where her daughter was, she got Mercury to talk to Jupiter and sent Jupiter into the underworld. But Mercury was the negotiator. So Mercury gets a bad press, when people in Gemini get a bad press as being flighty and superficial. The lower vibration of having a lot of energy in Gemini is gossip. The higher vibration is like, let's communicate our knowledge.
Yes.
So if somebody has very strong Mercury energy in their chart, that would be their default setting, is let's communicate and share my knowledge.
Okay.
And help as many people as I can. It's like with me, I mean, I'm as Mercurial as you can get. I've 4 planets ruled by Mercury. And it's hilarious that we ended up sitting beside each other at that event, because it was a very busy event. And I arrived late. And who do I sit beside? The mother, who's a Gemini sibling. Is it your son or daughter who's Gemini?
I'm going to keep that one quiet.
Okay, sorry. Okay, that's fair enough.
But also that you taught me that because I'm a Virgo, that is Mercury,
Yes, so we had the Mercury connection. So two very Mercurial people sat beside each other in a room with about 50 people.
Yes, exactly.
Like neither of us came in saying, I want to go to sit beside you and nobody else. Because I think we had sat beside each other at a previous event as well, hadn't we, at Christmas time?
Do you know what happened at Christmas time? It was the first time I ever met you. So we have these, get-togethers through the network, and how we introduced ourselves at the start of the Christmas meal. And it was possibly a full moon. I can't remember which one.
Indeed. It was a full moon. I can't remember. It was definitely.
And how you had, and that's another thing I want to speak about, especially today, is a new moon in Cancer, right? And how you had said it's going to be a very, very chatty lunch today,
That's right.
And that kind of brings me to my next part. I, as a child, even though I was probably, I wasn't not allowed, but because astrology was kind of laughed at, I never thought about it. But since I was a young child, I was always influenced by the moon and couldn't sleep well, during certain moons. And so I would love to hear more from you, about the moon, and also about how do you address this, because you've shared that there's Greek or Roman gods that the planets are based on,
Absolutely,
so that's mythology. And if somebody came to you and said, but that's not based in science, what do you say to them, Martha?
I sometimes get very stroppy because I was just looking back actually, and it was a full moon in Gemini the night before we had the Christmas lunch, because I write the new and the full moons in my diary. So it was a full moon in Gemini, and I had said it was going to be a very chatty lunch, and certainly was the longest lunch I ever went to. So today we have the new moon in Cancer at 7:30 Irish time. So the moon will have a time variation of 24 hours depending on where you are in the world. I mean, sometimes, and particularly in Ireland, you do get people who like to take a pot shot at astrologers and knock you down a bit. And to be honest, I don't pay any attention to it anymore. I used to get very upset. And now I'll kind of just, maybe depending on my moods, I'll kind of say something like, well, actually, the planets do exist. Mars does exist as a planet. Uranus, Pluto, Neptune do exist as planets. Venus exists as a planet. Venus is coming up to its retrograde period now in about 3 days' time. And I tend to leave it at that. I mean, I used to be quite defensive about astrology, particularly back in Ireland. I mean, when I lived in the States, Americans love astrologers. You'd go to a dinner party and somebody would tell the whole dinner party what their astrologer had told them. Here, people act like they're having a secret affair if they're going to an astrologer. you know, and you see the new moon and the full moon. The new moon is a time of setting intentions for what you want to bring into your life for the next 6 months, when then the full moon will be in the same sign. And as I've written before, we're going through, this is one of the most titanic years astrologically, you know, in several hundred years, because the last 3 years have been a cleaning up of the past. And this particular 6 months, it's been accentuated with Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. So it's been a clearing out of outdated ways of being, outdated ways of power, outdated abuse of power. Just look at what's happening in France. Look what's happening in RTE. Look how relevant that is.
So RTE for
so relevant.
Sorry that I sometimes put in, Martha, because I can't probably, the communication bit of seeing your face at the moment is missing. There are some members or parents who watch this who are not in Ireland. So when Martha mentions RTE, it's the Major Broadcasting System.
National Broadcasting Network.
In Ireland, right? And similar with the BBC in Ireland.
Yes, I only saw that 2 days ago. Yeah.
And so also another thing, you know, for maybe anybody who's interested in this, but maybe a bit like I was years ago and didn't, I needed proof. That's how I approached everything. And I now believe that to combine this, what maybe our Western world calls science-based, you know, and more, I don't know, I call it spiritual. I think the way forward, and I hear that everywhere, is to combine the two. And what I did is how I started trusting astrology was that I heard about this phenomenon of the retrogrades, and especially Mercury retrograde, you know. So, and I'll let you explain this in a minute a bit better. But what I heard is that
Mercury goes retrograde 3. Sorry, what were you saying? You broke up there?
Yeah, so I wanted to share that the Mercury retrograde phenomenon, which I would like you to speak to in just a moment, but what I needed to find for myself, you know, to get the proof that not just astrologers are saying it, but I observed it for a few years in my own life, you know. So I noticed that rather than listening to everything that is out there and interested, I started observing during those retrogrades, you know, things were so much slower moving. And there's this thing of that there will be more delays of planes and schedules. And because we're meant to go inward and rethink and reconsider. And this is what I've been learning. So maybe you could share a bit more on, you know, that why it's helpful to know what is going on in the planet,
helpful, because it empowers you to take charge of your life. And you know what people don't realize about Mercury retrograde, a lot of what's written about it is pure nonsense. But it's basically 3 times a year where Mercury appears to go backwards, but in fact it's not. And it's 3 times a year for 3 weeks. But we also have what we call a pre-shadow and a post-shadow phase of 3 weeks either side.
Okay,
that's 9 weeks 3 times a year. And then every 3 or 4 years, Mercury will be retrograde 4 times a year. One thing that people don't take into account is we actually have so much more technology in our lives. We don't just have one computer in the corner. We all have our own laptops. We all have our iPads and we have our phones. I mean, look at the challenge you and I had coming online here before this session.
Please do share.
My brand new laptop, and it's not Mercury retrograde or the pre-shadow phase, but my brand new laptop has been configured by not 1, but 2 people over a period of 3 weeks. So we actually have more technology in our lives to go wrong. You know, we now have all these apps and the 2-step authentication, and that's part of Pluto and Capricorn. That's nothing to do with Mercury retrograde. But what I usually advise people to do during Mercury retrograde, it's a time of deep inner stillness. It's kind of like if you think of Mercury as the god who was always going between the spirit world and the earthly world and the underworld, helping everybody. And it's kind of like Mercury is just taking a rest and letting us all figure it out for ourselves. That's how I like to now describe Mercury retrograde. And I will tell clients all the time is like, get a journal every day. The Artist's Way is one of my Bibles. Turn off all your gadgets, turn off everything. Go for a walk in the woods, bring your diary, buy a nice diary and a nice pen and go for a nice cup of coffee, because we're on in technology more than ever before, but that actually is also part of our lives now.
Yes.
I mean, AI is everywhere.
Yeah.
I've lost count of the number of people who said use AI to write your astrology posts, and I'm going, I don't think so.
I know.
I'll never catch up with like a good astrologer who knows like what the planetary configurations are going to be for the next couple of years.
That's
You know,
it.
so
And
the next Mercury retrograde period, just to help your listeners, is when is it now? Is the pre-retrograde period is the 4th of August.
Yeah.
Then it goes retrograde from the 23rd of August until the 15th of September in Virgo. And then the post-retrograde period ends in September on the 30th of September. So the sign that Mercury is retrograde in is always very, very important. So the next one is in Virgo.
Yes.
So there will be an emphasis of tidying up your affairs. But the collective emphasis this year anyway, which is far bigger than Mercury retrograde, is Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. Look how fast, you know, RT, the National Broadcasting Authority, I've had friends said, oh, it's just yet another scandal. And I said, like, no, it's not.
Okay.
The new Director General got rid of the old board. They're gone.
Wow. Oh, wow. I didn't know.
Yeah. He appointed new board straight away.
That's
And
not
all the old boys network and the old way of doing things, and the car that somebody had that they forgot to ever declare. That's all been sorted, cleared.
Oh,
you know.
And you know what I would like to come. You're saying so much, and I absolutely love it. Maybe what I would love is maybe a parent or anyone who sees that and has questions and is picking up on things to leave a comment under this video. You know,
absolutely,
we can only hear you. Maybe next time we figure out the video and to ask questions, and we could have a whole topic on it. But I would love to go into a bit more, and especially with you probably are aware of this, with the challenges of technology in parenting as well, you know, and our children are being directed outward. And what I think we need to hold against is to also, like the Mercury you just explained, there is a time for going outward and inward, and so are the seasons in life as well. So it would be so helpful, you know, for us to find out when to come within. And what I think with AI, what you shared, is that we can teach our children how to discern, you know, what their truth is and what's out there, right?
Yeah. So, and I mean, I would hate to be a parent now. I really would. I think it's more challenging than ever. Like my daughter was 14 when everybody started getting mobile phones. No, she was 11. And I remember, you know, when she was going to secondary school, like all the friends got given a present of a mobile phone because they were starting secondary school. And I complained to the school, and they said, like, well, what happens if they're attacked on the way home from school? And I said, well, like, how did you handle that 6 months ago?
Yes.
You know, we've lost the whole thing of like letting our kids be bored.
Absolutely.
Our kids don't know how to be bored anymore. Like, go out on the road and play with somebody.
That's it.
You know, that's why you know, we don't do that anymore. Find somebody to play with.
And that's why I think as well, like the Mercury period, you know, where maybe sometimes it does impact technology. It really does, and our cars and everything. And maybe that is also a way by nature how to stop us a little bit and step back, or I'm all about in parenting, you know, to help our children guide for the future. And and for that phone usage, for example, you know, when the parent is gone at the age of 18, that we now in those years help them to develop a healthy sense of, you know, and a bit of an etiquette as well to be with friends.
I mean, it's only recently that the research is coming out about how damaging all the social media platforms are teenagers. It's only now that information is being released. We've all known it for years. You know, what it does to your concentration level, what it does to your self-esteem, you know, online bullying, all of that. Like, that's all become the norm now. There was a time where if you were bullied at school, at least you went home when you were safe at home. Now the online bullying, you know, it appears through so many platforms. So, you know, one of the best things I would advise parents to do is invoke the Venus in your child's chart, which is your creativity. You know, are they more inclined, because we're all creative beings, you know, are they more inclined to writing? Are they more inclined to painting? Gardening is creative. We don't see gardening as being creative, but it is. You know, if you're a mother who hates the thought of painting mess in your house, which I was one of those mothers, even though my daughter was very gifted, so I used to, like, you know, we were very lucky. We had a painting room and a toy room where it didn't matter what mess you made, the mess got left there.
Yeah.
You know, and helicopter parents want to tidy up every mess every child ever makes.
Yeah.
But, you know, you could start with like a herb garden, you know, even if you live in a flat and you have no garden, you could do a herb garden, for example, or you could grow indoor plants, or you can buy cheap markers and cheap paper if you don't want to get into paints, or you can give them a notebook and encourage them to write. So that's what I would say to parents of young kids, is to invoke the Venus in their chart, which is what they love doing.
Yes, they do.
You know, invoke their creativity, teach them that their creativity is just as important as how well they do in maths and geography and sciences, because we still label our kids. We still label them. If they're good at science, they can't be good at art. If they're good at art, they can't possibly be good at sports as well. We still do that, particularly in Ireland, where subjects like music are like almost a luxury subject. Like in Switzerland, for example, like the schools buy the instruments and they get handed down to each class. In Ireland, lots of schools, you still have to buy the instruments for your kids.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, learning the guitar, learning the accordion, or learning a concertina becomes a luxury option for a parent. But, you know, you could still start with a tin whistle, for example.
Yeah, and you know, when you say that, Martha, Ireland is such a musical country, maybe it's taken for granted that a lot of people pick up a guitar and they know.
And yet it's not really in the schools.
Yes.
It's not.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not sure what it's like in Germany. I mean, I haven't lived there for a number of years, but, you know, I have a friend who was part of the youth orchestra, and he told me that. He said, no, the schools buy all the instruments, and the instruments get passed down from class to class. I mean, that's not rocket science. That would be an outlay of maybe €2,000 for a school, and then all the kids have the opportunity to learn what instruments they want. But, you know, as parents, you know, if parents that are on a budget, they can still maybe try a tin whistle, or buy a cheap and cheerful guitar, or, as I said, try paints or try writing. And that would be what I would recommend as being an antidote to all the technology and the screen time.
Yeah. Absolutely. And have that balance, right? If to not make the mistake to not allow it either, because then that resistance and rebellion, you know, it just makes it so much worse. But to have a consumption and creation, I heard one parent once call it, you know, you consume and you create, so that children learn there is that balance as well.
Yeah, like in Northern Ireland, like GAA is huge. What if your kid isn't sport here, doesn't want to do GAA, doesn't want to do football or soccer or rugby or hurling, you know? I mean, I know when my daughter was younger, I curtailed what she did, because I was a single parent. I couldn't bring her here, there, and everywhere. You know, and I know people whose parents are separated, and then the grandparents are bringing the kids to all the sporting activities that they say, oh, they have to do. And you go, well, actually, they don't.
And you know why I'm speaking to you? I'm just wondering,
would they be a more rounded person if they did less sports and more art, or more of both?
Yeah. And I wonder if somebody, you know, a parent came to you to find out a bit as well. I wonder if the children's astrology charts would reveal more what they're interested in. You know, I imagine now these parents pushing children into all these activities that they weren't able to do as a child themselves, and now they have their child doing it, you know.
Absolutely.
Which is understandable, because we always, I think, in parenting do the opposite to almost help evolution, you know. But I wonder if certain star signs or certain children, you know, already reveal on their charts, oh, this child would love swimming instead of GAA, because it's just, or maybe a Cancer or something, you know.
Absolutely. You can spot everything in a child's soul the minute you look at their chart. And just because the child is 3 months old doesn't mean you know less about them than if you're doing the chart of somebody who's 50 or 60, because your natal birth chart is what your soul came here in this lifetime to learn and experience and to give to the world, and what your life's lessons are for the duration of your life. It's embedded in your chart. You know, one of the things I'm constantly asked is, you know, the actual birth moment. And we all know of people that were cesareans, or people who were pulled out by forceps. I mean, I was a forceps baby. If I'd been born 20 minutes later, my 12th house planets would be in the first house. I'd have no interest in astrology whatsoever. I'd be a completely different person. But, you know, coming back to, you know, Venus is your creativity and it's your value system. Mercury is how you communicate. And particularly another planet that's very useful for parents is Jupiter. Jupiter is how you learn.
Okay.
You know, if a child has Jupiter in a fire sign, they may well be somebody who needs to be in the science lab doing every experiment going. Or very often, because Jupiter changes signs every year, it doesn't change signs exactly every 12 months. It changes signs every year. So when you allow for the retrograde period, it's not the same month every year. And we all know that there can be a gap of 1.5 years between children's ages in a classroom.
Oh, yeah.
If the teacher knew that actually half the class have Jupiter in one sign, the other have Jupiter in another sign, that would help the teacher enormously. Like, for example, my Jupiter is in Capricorn. So like that's slow, steady, methodical. People who have Jupiter in Sagittarius, that's its natural sign. So Jupiter in Sagittarius needs to learn through a fiery, active way. So for example, you know, I was one of the youngest in my class. So like all the people in my class with Jupiter in Sagittarius, when they broke the rules, they got caught because they were active and out. You know, they were the outward ones challenging the teachers, or they'd break the rules. These were in the days where schools were very, very strict, whereas the ones with Jupiter and Capricorn broke the same rules and never got.
And they never got caught.
Never got caught. No. So, you know, so Jupiter is how you learn. And again, it's how the planets talk to each other, Annette. It's like that makes you, that helps parents learn, well, actually, this is how their Mercury is expressed. If somebody is Mercury, Saturn, for example, they'll be quite measured in how they communicate, because Saturn is discipline and routine and structure. They'll be very structured in how they communicate. And the thing about Mercury and the moon is your emotions. And if you think about it, there's a logical link between how we communicate and how we feel. I always think they're the two planets that are mostly connected, like how we think and how we feel are almost blended. So if we can't express how we feel, how can we have our needs met?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I worked one time with the family, and the mother had Mercury in Aries and the moon in Aries, and the child had Mercury and the moon in water signs. And the mother would say incredibly hurtful things without thinking to the child. And then it'd be an hour later, you know, I've apologized, you know, why are you still crying? Let's have a cup of tea and make up. And the child would be in bits over something that the mother had said without thinking. You know, so, you know, we all know how we communicate with our children is so important. And we all have children that, you know, would drive us nuts with their obstinate, stuck stubbornness. And sometimes as a parent, we have to learn to just like let it go.
Yes, absolutely.
They'll communicate in their own time.
Yeah.
They'll come out of their room in their own time, not when we want them to. It's probably one of the hardest lessons of being a parent. Or
I agree.
We always think that if you treat your children equally, that you're being fair. But astrology teaches us no. They came into this earth as completely different individuals. Our children came into this earth to teach their parents all the lessons their parents had no idea they needed to learn.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And that's
I used to be quoted saying, I'll never have a Scorpio. I'll never have a Scorpio. What did I get? I planned not to have a Scorpio. What did I have? A quadruple Scorpio. This was before I was seriously interested in astrology. My friends cracked up because they were all doing the calculations. And you know, the way your first child is often 2 weeks early or 2 weeks late, is like, if she's 2 weeks early, she'll still be a Scorpio. If she's 2 weeks late, she'll also be a Scorpio. You know, but I used to focus so much on the Scorpio energy, I would miss that she was a treble Virgo and she was also a treble Capricorn. So sometimes a parent can overemphasize one part of a child's chart and forget about the other. That's equally important.
Oh, Martha, I love this. So one of my questions, but I think it's almost irrelevant. I was going to ask you, we sometimes, I'm observing, is we find our calling of what how you said, what our soul is here to do quite late in life, after we've gone through all the crisis and tried all different things. And I wondered what you would have done differently in your life had you known it earlier about astrology. But it sounds like you always kind of knew about astrology.
That's a really interesting question. I had always had a passing interest in it, and I ended up in tourism from the age of 19, and it was like getting paid to enjoy myself.
Oh, I love
I'm
it.
Sagittarian descendant with Jupiter in the 7th. So I was actually in an industry that actually suited my chart without knowing anything about astrology. I was in an industry that suited my natal birth chart. So I was embodying that part of my chart without knowing anything about astrology. I came to astrology in my mid-40s, seriously, when nothing made sense of my marriage or why I was so unhappy in every single area of my life. So that's what a lot of people do. They'll embody one part of their chart anyway when they're younger. And they might only come to astrology if there's a pattern that they see. They kind of go, hang on, I'm in a new relationship and it's the same pattern as the last one. Or I'm in a job that I hate and I don't know how to leave it. Like, I was never in a job I hated. When I worked in tourism, I mean, we had the life O'Reilly. It was like getting paid to be on holidays.
Yeah.
These were in the days of like double time for Saturdays, Sundays, and treble time for Mondays and bank holidays. And myself and the only other German staff, sure, we had it sussed because we would swap our days off. So we'd have like 5 days off and a bank holiday. I mean, nobody has those kind of jobs now. But again, you know, we're also living in a time where we have more than one vocation.
Yeah. Okay.
One vocation is right for when we're in our 20s, and it's something else when we're in our 30s, and something else in our 40s. And that's often triggered by the major collective transits like your Saturn return, or the Uranus opposition is a big one at 38 to 42. If you're not living an authentic life, Uranus will just come along and blow it out of the water for you.
That's why it's so linked to
that's why it's so linked to the midlife crisis.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You know, I got married and gave up work during my Uranus opposition, and got married and moved to Wales, married a widower with 3 kids. But by the time my Uranus opposition was over, my marriage was over, and I spent another 3 or 4 years trying to make it work.
There you go. It's all
Uranus opposition is, you know, depending on where Uranus is in your chart, it lasts longer for some people than for others.
Yeah.
You know.
And that just reminds me of something I thought of before our call. You know, some people might think, oh, astrology tells you about your future or something kind of woo-woo, you know. But I'm thinking it's more like a guidance. And a thought that just came. I know this 17-year-old who's going to the Leaving Cert cycle now in September, you know, and how that what you are doing, Martha, is so helpful for so many. First of all, finding their vocation, and then what you were also touching on is different learning styles, you know. So that could be so topical for someone who needs to now sit down for the Leaving Cert to find their learning style and not, you know, drive themselves into burnout before they sit the Leaving Cert. What do you think as final thoughts?
I mean, I would love to go into schools and talk about it. I mean, I did approach schools a couple of years ago and it was too woo-woo for them. But I mean, I'm somebody who's a very slow, methodical learning style. But like when I was in school, I couldn't learn a language to save my life. I now speak French, German, Italian fluently. Put me in the country and I'll soak it up like a sponge.
Absolutely.
Put me in a desk with a teacher and it's like, oh, this is really boring. Do I really have to learn all these rules, regulations? You know, and then also our learning styles change as we get older, and technology is also changing how we learn. Technology is changing how we learn completely now. I mean, we all go to Dr. Google to learn stuff.
Yeah. And then we need to discern, you know, is that actually the truth? Where's the truth, right? Yeah. So
I hope this is, but it profoundly, particularly for anybody who is teenagers who don't know school.
Sorry, it's cutting out a little bit. Can you still hear me, Martha?
Because there's also particularly in Ireland, you know, some of our children can end up becoming perpetual students. They go and they leave school and then they do course after course, or they change course, and then they're 27 and they're still not out in the world working. That's not necessarily a good thing either.
The sound keeps cutting out.
Maybe we're meant to finish then. Maybe.
Yeah.
So
in closing, where can anybody who is interested now, maybe as a parent for themselves or for their child, where can they find you? What are you on platforms or your website? I'm going to leave it all in the links below.
My website is marthaclarkeastrology.com. I blog every 2 weeks. I also post on social media. And if people want to sign up to my newsletter, they can do it on the website. I have some special offers coming up in the summer months as well.
Brilliant. I'm going to put all your links below. And I highly recommend signing up to your newsletter. I only read it, the last one, this morning. And yeah, unfortunately, the sound keeps breaking up, so I'm going to leave it here. But I would love to do this again sometime, maybe on even the classroom or anything that that might even come up for parents. So feel free to leave us a comment below. We would love to hear what you took from this. And Martha, if you can still hear me, I wish you
I can. Yeah.
I wish you a lovely rest of this new moon, Cancer day, and for you to set those intentions for the next 6 months.
Thank you very much. Thanks a million for having me. I'll
Thank
talk
you,
to you again soon. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.